lot of words in this tremendous gospel. But there is one word that jumps out for me on this Easter Sunday. It's one word that I've thought about all week long. It's one word that when I read this gospel lesson, I believe that that one word summarizes what the Easter story is all about. It summarizes what the experience was for the women when they went to the tomb. It summarizes the experience that Peter had when he went to the tomb. The word that jumps out for me is remember. When they went to the tomb, they had an experience that they would forever, for the rest of their lives, remember. So I was thinking about it before worship even began, that was the word that would jump out at me for this Easter celebration. But then worship began, and I realized that that word perfectly summarizes our experience at House of Prayer today. This is an Easter celebration that we will remember for a long, long time. We have the incredible music of the organ, enhanced today with the brass. The choir is singing during the offering. The praise team is singing during communion. The congregation is singing maybe better than I've ever heard us sing before. The church is decorated beautifully with flowers everywhere. We had not just one baptism, but we had 2 baptisms. And last, but certainly not least, it is on this day that we gather together. The tomb was empty, but the church is full, because we gather together to celebrate that Christ is risen. We gather to celebrate that Jesus has defeated sin and death. This is the day that the Lord has made. We do rejoice in it, and we are glad in it, and it is a day that we will remember for a really long time. The word remember is an important word in the Bible. It's found at least a couple of hundred times in the Bible. And it's actually been heard numerous times over the last couple of days. If you've been journeying with us throughout this Holy Week, you have heard the word remember. You might remember hearing the word a few times. So let me see how well you remember hearing the word. This is a really easy one. At the Last Supper, Jesus took a little bit of bread, and he took a little bit of wine, and he held it up for the disciples, and what did he say? Do this in remembrance of me. We celebrate Easter today, we celebrate the resurrection today, but every time that we eat the bread and we drink the wine in remembrance of Jesus, we are celebrating the resurrection. We are celebrating Jesus present with us in this place or wherever we are breaking the bread and drinking the wine in remembrance of him. And so we remembered that a few days ago. We also remembered something that Peter remembered a few days ago. A few days ago we heard that as Jesus was journeying to the cross, that Peter was scared, he was terrified, and everyone that asked him, are you following Jesus? Are you a disciple of Jesus? Time and time again, Peter said, no, I don't know that man. No, you look like one of those disciples. No, I don't know who you're talking about. No, I'm pretty sure that you were with him. I don't know that man. And then the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered what Jesus had said. That's what Scripture tells us. Peter remembered that Jesus had told him, before the rooster crows, you will deny knowing me 3 times. Something for us to remember. The Gospel of Luke is where we have our Easter story from today. The resurrection story shows up in all of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But it's in Luke that we hear the story a little bit differently. And it's in Luke that we have the very memorable line, the very memorable thing that the criminal said hanging on the cross next to Jesus. Do you remember what that criminal said? He was hanging next to Jesus, and he looked at him, and he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And then Jesus said something even more memorable. Jesus says, truly today you will be with me in paradise. That's a foretaste of the feast to come, right? That's what we long to hear one day. We long to hear Jesus say to us, truly today you will be with me in paradise. He says it to the criminal hanging on the cross next to him. He will say it to us one day as well. And then the women at the tomb today, they get to the tomb early in the morning, but they don't remember what Jesus had said. And so when they get to the tomb, they wonder, like, did we go to the wrong tomb? Or did someone steal Jesus' body? Or is this just some terrifying nightmare that even though the sun has risen, we haven't woken up from yet? And just as they are perplexed and fearful, two angels appear and they say to the women at the tomb, remember. Remember what he said to you? Remember that he told you that he would be crucified, that he would be buried, and that on the third day he would rise again. Don't you remember? And then the next verse of our gospel lesson says, they remembered. The women remembered. And at the moment that they remembered, they realized that Jesus had risen from the dead. It was through the remembrance that their sadness turned into joy. It was through their remembrance that their doubt became belief. It was through their remembrance that their fear became a bold witness. And they raced to the disciples. And they said to the disciples, he has risen. But they didn't believe him. They didn't believe the women because they didn't remember what Jesus told them. Memory is such an important thing. It's such a beautiful thing, right? And many of us have had people in our lives who suffer from dementia, struggle with memory loss. And it's such a tragic thing to watch that happen because memories are where we have this interplay between the past and the present and the future. That when we remember something from the past or we remember someone from the past, that person from the past becomes present among us. Maybe not in the same way that they have always been present among us, but they become present among us still in a very real way. And there's the interplay between the present and the future as well. If you maybe tie a string around your finger, around your wrist to remember something at the store. And if you remember it, then you've brought the present into the future. Memory is such an important thing, and on this day, when we gather at the empty tomb, we gather here to remember that Jesus rose from the dead. But I know that as I look around with all of you today, that so many of us have come here also with memories of people that we have loved and people whom we have lost. And we come with those memories and we look for the comfort of the promise of the resurrection, and we say, if he rose from the dead, then they too shall arise. If he rose from the dead, then we too shall arise. And so there are countless people, as I look around the room, loved ones of yours that I know who have died recently, who you have brought with you today in your memory. People who have sat in this place, who are with us today, in a very real way because we are remembering them on this day that we remember the resurrection. And so as I was writing my sermon, I realized that it's 2016. It takes me a while sometimes to realize what year I'm living in. And I went, wow, 2016. And so I did the math, and it was really easy math to do. I realized that the year 2016 will mark the 20th year since my dad died. I don't tell you that to have sympathy from you because you also have, some of you have had loved ones who have been gone for 20 years or more. But the reason that I want to tell you that it's 20 years, because that's a significant number, right? 20? What else is significant is that 2016 marks the year that I will turn 40 years old. That's really hard to believe. Especially when you look at me and you know how I act. I don't act like a 39-year-old. I don't look like a 39-year-old. But it's been 20 years since my dad died, and it will be 40 years since I was born, which means that this is the year that marks the time that I will be alive longer with my dad no longer alive by my side than when I actually had him in my life. But as I reflected on it being 20 years, I thought there is no way that it's been 20 years because it doesn't feel like 20 years, and it's because I talk about my dad all the time. I remember my dad all the time. Some of you that are hearing me talk about my dad die may think that my dad is still alive until this sermon. Because a lot of times I talk about him as if he is present. Because in so many ways, he still is. In so many ways, the loved ones that you remember this day and every day are present with you. And so about a decade ago, my wife and I realized that we might not be talking about death quite as seriously as we should in our household. Because my son, who is now 13 years old, was a toddler at the time. And Asher came and sat on my lap. And there was a picture of my dad sitting on the desk. And Asher, who had never met my dad before, my dad had died years before he was born, looked at the picture and he said, "I love Grandpa." And I said, "He would love you too, Asher. He does love you. Oh, he would be so proud of you." And then he looked at me and he said, "Hey, Dad, maybe we can go to church on Sunday and see Grandpa." And my heart broke because I thought, what am I not teaching him about death? And I said, "No, Asher, it doesn't work that way. Your grandpa died. We can't go to church and see him on Sunday." But he was an insistent toddler. And he said, "No, Dad, maybe we can go to church on Sunday and see Grandpa." And I said, "We'll see him someday in heaven. He's with Jesus. Jesus promises eternal life." And just like Peter needed to hear 3 times, right? He needed to deny Jesus 3 times before he remembered. I denied Asher 3 times too. And I said, "No, we're not going to see Grandpa if we go to church on Sunday." And that 3rd time that he said, "Let's go to church and see Grandpa," I realized that my toddler son understood the resurrection better than me. He was living out the words of the angels in our gospel for today. The angels say to the women at the tomb, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead? He's not here. He has risen." And so my toddler son had recognized at that time that when we look for our loved ones who have gone before us, we can go and grieve at the cemetery. But we remember them and we experience them in our presence by going to the places where they are still alive. My dad was a pastor. Of course you'd find him in a church. And so Asher realized we can go and we can sense Grandpa in church because that's where he would be. When I miss my dad, I rock out on my guitar because he played guitar. When I miss my dad, I go to church camp. Those are the places where I know that he's still alive. And it's not just my dad that still is alive in a real present way. It's all of our loved ones, and it's on this Resurrection Sunday, it's on this Easter Sunday that the past and the present and the future are united. Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. He is the resurrection and the life. He promises even though we die, we will live. And just as he said to the man hanging on the cross, today you will be with me in paradise. One day, because Jesus has defeated death, we will see Jesus and our loved ones in the kingdom of heaven. Thanks be to God, and hallelujah.